poor little twin girl begs a millionaire to take them to their mother's grave. When he sees the name on the tombstone, he turns pale. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The sun had barely risen when Alexander Reed left his mansion and headed to the garage. The meeting with Japanese investors was set for 8 hours, and he liked to arrive at the office before everyone else. It was part of his flawless routine, the same one that had taken him to the top before the age of 35. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," greeted the driver, already holding open the limousine door. "Good morning, Robert," he replied automatically, checking emails on his phone as he stepped into the vehicle. Settling into the leather seat, Alexander felt something different in the air. Perhaps it was the unusually blue sky for that time of year, or the silence in the still deserted streets, but there was a strange sensation, as if the universe were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The limousine glided smoothly through the gates of the property and onto the main avenue. Alexander remained absorbed in his phone until Robert braked sharply, causing him to let out a grunt of irritation. "What was that?" "Sorry, sir," Robert answered, pointing to the front of the car. "Children in the street." Alexander looked out the window and saw 2 small girls standing in front of the limousine. They had messy light brown hair and wore threadbare clothes far too big for their tiny bodies. They couldn't be older than 5. "What the heck are they doing alone at this hour of the morning?" he muttered, more to himself than to the driver. The girls did not move. They just stood there, holding hands, staring at the car as if waiting for something. Alexander sighed deeply. "Wait here," he ordered, and got out of the vehicle. The morning air was cool, and he adjusted his tailored Italian jacket as he approached the children. They were identical twins, he realized. They had big, serious eyes, delicate features, and an expression of determination that seemed out of place on such young faces. "Shouldn't you be in school?" he asked firmly, but without harshness. "Where? Are your parents?" One of the girls took a tiny step forward. "I'm Emily," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. "And this is my sister Sophie." She pointed to the twin who watched him with slightly more wary eyes. "Our mom is in heaven." Alexander felt an involuntary tightness in his chest. Orphans. He knew that feeling all too well. "I'm sorry," he said, softening his tone, "but shouldn't you be with some grown-up? It's dangerous for 2 little girls to be out here alone." "We need your help," Sophie said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was slightly lower than her sister's. "You look kind." There was something in the child's sincerity that unsettled him. Alexander looked around, searching for an adult who might be supervising the girls from a distance, but he saw no one. "My help with what?" he replied, checking his watch. He was starting to run late. Emily opened the small, worn backpack she was carrying and pulled out a faded notebook with several loose pages. "We want you to write a letter to our mom," she explained, holding out the notebook. "We don't know how to write very well yet." Alexander looked from the girl to the notebook, then at Robert, who waited patiently behind the wheel, and back to the girls. The situation was absurd. He had a meeting that could define the future of his company, and here he was, standing on the sidewalk, approached by 2 children wanting him to write a letter to someone who had already passed away. "Look, I really need to go, please," Sophie insisted, her eyes suddenly filling with tears. "Mom is waiting." Something in the restrained despair of those words struck him. He remembered himself, a skinny boy begging for scraps of attention. He sighed again. 5 minutes, he relented, pointing to a nearby bench. "Let's sit over there." The girls smiled identical smiles that lit up their dirty faces, and followed him to the bench. Alexander sat in the middle with a twin on each side. Emily handed him the notebook, and Sophie pulled a well-worn pencil out of the pocket of her dress. "What do you want to tell her?" he asked, mentally preparing to write something short and finish this quickly. "That we miss her a lot," Emily began. "A whole lot," Sophie repeated, looking at the clouds as if she could see their mom through them. "And that we still keep her photo under our pillow," Emily continued. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded, crumpled photograph. "Here," she said, offering it to Alexander. So you know how pretty she is. Alexander took the photo out of courtesy, ready to write down whatever the girls dictated. But when he unfolded the paper and his eyes landed on the image, the world seemed to stop. It was the face of a young woman with light brown hair like the girls, wearing a smile he knew better than his own reflection in the mirror. Sarah. The air rushed from his lungs as if he'd been punched. His hands started trembling uncontrollably, and before he could stop himself, a tear slipped down his face. He wiped it away quickly, but he couldn't stop the lump forming in his throat. Sarah Morgan. Is Sarah, are you crying? Emily asked, leaning closer to see his face better. Alexander couldn't speak. Memories flooded in. Sarah sharing her lunch with him when he'd run away from home, starving. Sarah cleaning his wounds after his father's beatings. Sarah holding his hand at her own mother's funeral. Sarah encouraging him to accept a scholarship, even though it meant leaving. You knew our mom? Sophie asked, her eyes widening in surprise. Alexander swallowed hard and nodded, still unable to form words. We were, he began, his voice cracking. We were friends a long time ago. The twins exchanged looks of astonishment, and then moved closer to him, suddenly curious. Really? Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining. How did you meet her? Later, Alexander said carefully, refolding the photo and handing it back to Sophie. The past could wait. Now he needed to understand these girls' situation. How long? How long has it been since she left? 2 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days, Emily answered promptly. We count every day. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process it all. Sarah gone. These girls, her daughters, left. Alone. Where do you live? He asked, a sudden alarm running down his spine. Who's taking care of you? At 37 Westfield Alley, apartment 2C, Emily replied as if she had memorized the address. We take care of ourselves. We know how to make instant noodles and everything. The pride in her voice was like a knife to Alexander's chest. 5-year-olds alone, cooking to survive. But the neighbors help, Sophie added. The lady in 3A sometimes leaves food at our door. Alexander stood up abruptly, slipping the photo into his inside jacket pocket. The meeting with the Japanese investors, the millions at stake, everything seemed insignificant now. Let's write this letter, he said, sitting down again. Then I'll take you home. The girls dictated their words of longing and love, telling their mom about their days, about how brave they were being, about the stars they now believed were her eyes. Alexander wrote down every word, fighting the emotion threatening to spill out. When he finished, Sophie looked at him shyly. Can you sign it too? She asked. So Mom knows we have a new friend. Alexander hesitated, then signed his name at the end of the letter. Another lump formed in his throat when he thought of all the years that had passed without contacting Sarah. If he had kept in touch, maybe she would still be alive. Maybe these girls wouldn't be alone. Let's go, he said, standing up and offering his hands to the girls. My car is waiting. As they walked toward the limousine, Sophie clutched his hand tightly and looked up. Mom said an angel would come for us, she said softly. Maybe it's you. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. He was no angel, far from it. He was just a man who had forgotten his humanity amid wealth and power. But maybe, just maybe, he could do the right thing now. I'll help you, he promised, opening the car door for them. Somehow, while the twins settled into the leather seats, Alexander gave Robert instructions and sent a message canceling the meeting. Some things were more important than business. Sarah had taught him that once, and now, through her daughters, she seemed to be teaching him again. The limousine stopped in front of a rundown building in Westfield Alley. Alexander watched through the window as he took in the dilapidated structure with peeling walls and windows patched with tape, a place where hope seemed as scarce as comfort. This is it, said Emily, already opening the car door. 3rd floor, apartment 2C. Alexander hesitated. Part of him wanted to go up, see how they lived, do something immediately, but another part, maybe fear, maybe guilt, kept him rooted to the leather seat. "Are you sure you'll be okay alone?" he asked, watching the two tiny girls jump onto the cracked sidewalk. Sophie nodded, adjusting the worn backpack on her shoulder. "We're always okay." There was a maturity in her eyes that no 5-year-old should have. It was the look of someone who had already faced too many losses. Alexander took out his wallet and pulled out some bills. "For food," he explained, handing them to Emily. The girl looked at her sister, hesitant. "Mom said not to take money from strangers," she recalled. "But he knew Mom," Sophie reasoned. "He's not a stranger." Emily took the money, carefully placing it in the pocket of her worn dress. "I'll come back tomorrow," Alexander promised, feeling a lump in his throat. "Will you be okay until then?" "We always are," Sophie answered simply. He watched them walk to the building's entrance, so small against the decaying structure, and disappear through the door. He didn't follow them. He didn't see where they lived. But in his mind, he was already imagining the worst. "Take me home, Robert," he instructed the driver, unable to tear his eyes away from the building's entrance even after the girls had vanished inside. During the entire ride back to his mansion, Alexander remained silent. Sarah's photo safely in his pocket like a painful talisman. The city flashed by in a blur outside the limousine window. The contrast between the opulence of wealthy neighborhoods and the misery of Westfield Alley more apparent than ever. Alexander's house, an imposing mansion in an exclusive gated community, had never seemed so cold and empty as when he walked into the grand foyer. The polished marble, the crystal chandeliers, the original art pieces, all seemed to mock him now. "Mr. Reed, there's a call from," began his housekeeper. "Cancel everything," he interrupted, already heading upstairs. "I don't want to be disturbed." In his bedroom, Alexander locked the door and went straight to the spacious closet. At the very back, behind rows of Italian suits and handmade shoes, was a cedar chest he hadn't opened in years. The only thing he'd kept from his life before becoming Alexander Reed, the relentless business magnate. He dragged the chest to the center of the room and stared at it for a long moment. Inside were all the memories he'd tried to bury, all the feelings he'd learned to ignore in order to build his empire. With slightly trembling hands, he turned the small key in the lock. The smell of the past escaped as he lifted the lid. Old paper, dusty memories, a forgotten life. On top was a yellowed envelope. Alexander opened it carefully, revealing a photograph. Sarah at 16, smiling under an oak tree in the park where they used to meet. Her smile, the same one he had seen that day in her daughter's faces, radiated a calm confidence that had always fascinated him. "Sarah," he whispered, running his fingers over the image. The memory came back in sharp detail, as if it had happened yesterday. It was a cold autumn day. Alexander was hiding in the small abandoned shed in the park, shivering from cold and hunger. He had run away from home again after yet another beating from his father. At 12, he already knew all the hiding places in the neighborhood. The door of the shed creaked, and he pressed himself against the wall, ready to flee. But it was only Sarah, carrying her worn school backpack. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to the cut on his temple. "It's nothing," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Sarah said nothing more. She sat beside him and opened her backpack. She pulled out a sandwich wrapped in plastic and broke it in half. "Here," she offered one half. "My mom always makes more than I can eat." He knew it was a lie. Sarah's mom barely had enough money to feed her own daughter, but he accepted because his hunger was stronger than his pride. While he ate, she cleaned the cut on his temple with a clean handkerchief. "You can stay in our garage tonight," Sarah offered, as if inviting him to a party. "My mom works the night shift. She won't see." Alexander stared at her, suspicious. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah shrugged. "Because nobody else will." Alexander blinked, returning to the present. He set the photo on the bed and continued rummaging through the chest. He found an old school notebook with notes in Sarah's round handwriting scrolled in the margins. "You can do it, Alex. Remember the formula." For weeks, she had helped him. Study for exams while he pretended not to care about grades. Another memory surfaced. "My mom lost her job," Sarah said as they studied under the dim light of the public library. They were 15, and she was working part-time at a diner after school. "Will you be okay?" Alexander asked, worried. Sarah shrugged, but he saw the fear in her eyes. "We'll figure something out." That night, he slept on the couch in Sarah's tiny house. Her mother had accepted his permanent presence after the third black eye. The next day, Alexander got a job unloading boxes at the local market. He handed his first paycheck to Sarah. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Rent," he replied matter-of-factly. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "I promise, Sarah, I'll never let you go without." Alexander swallowed hard, guilt weighing on him like lead. Alexander was 17 when he made that promise. At 18, he earned a scholarship to a university far away. Sarah urged him to go, even if it meant leaving her behind. "Go chase your dream," she had said. "I'll be fine." In the beginning, they spoke on the phone every week, then once a month. When Alexander got his first internship at a promising company, calls became rare. He was too busy building his career. By the time the company soared, and he became a millionaire before 30, the calls had stopped entirely. The last bundle in the chest contained newspaper clippings about his success, stories of the young business prodigy that Sarah had saved and mailed to him. In the last letter that accompanied the clippings, she wrote, "I always knew you'd change the world, Alex. I'm so proud." He never replied. Alexander slammed the chest shut and sat at his desk. He turned on his computer and began searching for Sarah's name. He needed to know what had happened, how she had ended up in that situation. He found a small obituary in the local paper dated 2 months ago. Sarah Morgan, 34, assistant teacher at Lincoln Elementary School, passed away after complications from pneumonia. She is survived by twin daughters, Emily and Sophie, age 5. The girls remain under the temporary care of neighbors until authorities decide their fate. Pneumonia. A completely treatable disease in the 21st century. His hands shook as he continued. Searching, he found a crowdfunding profile Sarah had created. She had tried to raise money for treatment. "I need to stay strong for my girls," read the description. The goal was $25,000 for hospitalization and specialized medications. She had, only raised $3,000. Alexander felt nauseous. $25,000. What he spent on a single business dinner. What he lost on a casual weekend golf bet. "Why didn't you come to me, Sarah?" he whispered to the empty room. But he knew the answer. Because he had left. Because he had ignored her letters for years. Because he had been so absorbed in his empire that he forgot the one person who believed in him when no one else did. The broken promise weighed on him like a ghost. "I'll never let you go without." Alexander glanced at the photo of young Sarah, then at the computer screen showing the twins on her crowdfunding page. He couldn't bring Sarah back, but maybe he could keep his promise in another way. He picked up the phone. "Robert, get the car ready for tomorrow morning," he ordered. 7. I have something important to do. Alexander arrived at Westfield Alley before 8 in the morning. The building where the twins lived looked even more decrepit in the daylight. Water stains climbed the external walls, plaster fell off in spots, and some windows were patched with cardboard. For a moment, he hesitated inside the limousine. He felt like an intruder here, wearing his $3,000 suit and Italian shoes, but the image of the small girls alone propelled him out of the car. "I'll be back in a few hours, Robert," he told the driver, then walked toward the building. The lobby smelled of mold and urine. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there for years. Alexander took the stairs, noticing cracked steps and a wobbly railing. On the 3rd floor, he stopped in front of apartment 2C and knocked. He waited, knocked again, harder. Nothing. A slight panic rose. Where were the girls? As he was about to knock a 3rd time, the door to the neighboring apartment opened. An elderly woman with white hair twisted into a messy bun and thick glasses eyed him with suspicion. "If you're looking for the girls, they're here with me," she said, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so frail. "Here?" Alexander asked, confused. Apartment 3A, the elderly woman replied, indicating her door. I'm Greta. I looked after them whenever Sarah had to work extra hours. Now. She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. May I see them? Alexander asked, feeling a knot in his throat. Greta assessed him from head to toe. You're the man who brought them home yesterday. It wasn't a question, but he nodded. I knew Sarah. We were childhood friends. That seemed to satisfy her partially. They're still sleeping, she said, but stepped aside to let him in. The tiny apartment looked as worn down as it did from outside. The wallpaper was peeling in many places. The couch had tears mended with tape, and the smell of dampness lingered. But it was clean, and there was a visible effort to maintain some dignity amid the poverty. They sleep over there, Greta said, pointing to a small room with its door ajar. Alexander walked quietly. The room was tiny, probably Greta's own bedroom. On the floor, on a thin mattress, Emily and Sophie slept curled up together as if they were one person. A single flimsy blanket covered them against the morning chill, and between their small bodies lay the worn notebook where they'd written the letter to their mom. Alexander's heart clenched. They were just children who had lost everything and clung to each other like lifelines. As he watched, Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something. He leaned in closer to listen. Mom said you were an angel, she whispered, still, half asleep, in that state between dreaming and waking. But you took so long to come. Alexander felt a shiver. The child was dreaming, obviously. Sarah couldn't have told her about him. She couldn't have known he would show up one day. They always talk in their sleep, Greta explained behind him. I think it's their way of keeping their mom alive. How long have they been with you? He asked, stepping back so as not to wake. Them. Since Sarah was hospitalized 3 months ago. At first it was just until she got better. The elderly woman's voice trailed off. Well, now I'm waiting for social services to decide. It's not official, you know. I'm too old to adopt and my health isn't good. Alexander nodded, understanding the precarious situation. I want to help. Greta smiled faintly. They need more stability than charity, Mr. Reed. Alexander Reed. Her eyes widened in recognition. The businessman from the magazines? Yes. Sarah kept newspaper clippings about you, Greta said, now looking at him with new interest. She never mentioned that she knew you personally. Before Alexander could answer, a sound came from the bedroom. The girls had woken up. Emily was the first to appear in the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. When she saw Alexander, her face lit up. You really came back, she exclaimed, running to hug his legs. Sophie followed close behind, more cautious but equally happy. I thought it was a dream, she said, her small voice filled with relief. Alexander felt something break inside him, a wall he had built over the years to separate the man he was from the boy he used to be. I promised I'd be back, didn't I? He smiled, crouching down to their level. And I have an idea. How about we go to the park today? The city's Central Park was almost empty at that hour of the morning. Alexander watched Emily and Sophie running through the grass, their laughter ringing in the crisp air. With ragged clothes and worn-out shoes, they still resembled wildflowers, tiny, resilient, determined to blossom despite the odds. Higher, Emily shouted, seated on a swing. Alexander pushed gently, surprised by the lightness he felt. He couldn't recall the last time he had done something as simple as pushing someone on a swing. His life had been a constant race of important tasks, decisive meetings, multi-million-dollar deals, and now here he was, discovering that a child's laughter could bring more satisfaction than closing any contract. My turn, Sophie complained, tugging at the sleeve of his expensive jacket. He alternated between the two, making sure each got equal attention. It felt strange how natural it seemed, as if something dormant within him was waking up. Did you really know our mom? Emily asked when they stopped to rest on a bench. Alexander nodded, feeling the familiar lump in his throat. We were friends, as kids. We lived in the same neighborhood. Was she pretty when she was little? Sophie wanted to know. She was the most beautiful person I ever knew, he answered honestly. inside and out. The girls smiled, proud. She used to sing to us every night, Emily said. Her song about a little bird looking for its nest. And she braided my hair, Sophie added. Said I looked like a princess. She baked butterfly-shaped birthday cakes, Emily went on, excited to talk about their mom, and fixed our toys when they broke. One by one, the little stories painted a portrait of the adult Sarah Alexander had never met, the loving, resourceful, dedicated mother who worked miracles with few resources. I'm hungry, Emily suddenly announced, holding her stomach. Alexander checked his watch. It was almost noon. Let's get something to eat. There was a fancy cafe across the street, but the girls pointed to a hot dog cart in the middle of the park. Mom used to buy us one sometimes, Sophie explained. On special Sundays. Alexander smiled and led them to the vendor. He ordered 3 fully loaded hot dogs and sodas, watching the girls eat with enthusiasm. He barely touched his own, remembering how Sarah had shared her lunch with him when they were children. Here, Alex. My mom always makes more than I can eat. The kind lie. So he wouldn't feel like a beggar. Do you go to school? He asked, realizing it was a weekday. The twins exchanged glances. We went to the same school Mom worked at, Emily answered. But after she went to heaven, we stopped. No one takes us, Sophie explained simply. And it's too far to go alone. Alexander took a deep breath, controlling the anger bubbling inside him. Another thing he needed to fix. I want to take you to a doctor today, he announced once they finished eating. For a checkup. Are we sick? Sophie asked, alarmed. No, sweetie. Just to make sure you're healthy, he smiled, trying to reassure her. And after that, we'll buy you some new clothes. How does that sound? The girl's eyes went wide with excitement. Can I get a pink dress? Emily asked. With white polka dots, Sophie added. You can have whatever you want, he promised, holding their little hands. A few hours later, they were back at Greta's apartment. The girls carried bags of new clothes, not as many as Alexander wanted to buy, but even so, the children already seemed overwhelmed by the novelty. The private doctor Alexander knew had confirmed that although their nutrition was not ideal, the twins were basically healthy. They needed some vitamins and dental follow-ups, but nothing serious. A blessing given the circumstances. Greta, look what we got, Emily exclaimed, running in to show off their new treasures as soon as they arrived. While the girls excitedly displayed each clothing item, Alexander pulled Greta aside. Could we talk for a bit? The elderly woman nodded and led him to the small kitchen, away from the children's eager ears. How did Sarah end up here? Alexander asked directly. In this place? Greta sighed, sinking heavily into a kitchen chair. She arrived pregnant 5 years ago, looking for a cheap place to start over. She never talked much about the past, but you could tell she was running from something. Or someone. The girl's father? A good-for-nothing, Greta spat. He showed up once when the girls were 2, drunk and demanding money. Sarah threw him out and threatened to call the police if he returned. She shook her head. He never came back. And how did she support them? With great sacrifice, Greta replied. She taught at the elementary school as a teacher's aide during the day. At night, she cleaned offices downtown. On weekends, she sold crafts at fairs. She worked until the last day even though she was already sick. Why didn't she look for help? Alexander asked, the question haunting him. I asked the same when the pneumonia got worse. Greta sighed. She said she'd already asked too much from people. She'd learned to manage on her own. Alexander closed his eyes, imagining Sarah, exhausted, ill, fighting alone. She scrimped on everything for herself, Greta went on. Mended her own clothes so she could buy children's books for the twins. Stretched one meal for days so they could have fruit. Sometimes she'd say she'd already eaten at work, just so the girls could have bigger portions. Every word was like a stab to Alexander's heart. While he lived in a mansion with staff catering to his every whim, Sarah had struggled to survive. Last Christmas, Greta continued, she made the girls new dresses from scraps she got for free at a store. She spent nights sewing after they went to sleep. They were so happy. They thought it was magic. Alexander pictured Sarah sitting in dim light sewing late into the night, her fingers sore just to see her daughter's smile on Christmas morning. When she got too sick to work, she sold the only valuable thing she had, a necklace that belonged to her mother. She got a small amount of money but paid the rent for one more month. Greta wiped away a tear. She made me swear I'd keep them girls together if something happened. That was her biggest fear, that they'd be separated in different foster homes. Alexander felt a knot in his throat. Why did she never reach out to me? I could have helped. Greta looked at him intently. She kept your clippings, newspaper stories, magazines. She showed them to the girls, saying, "Look how he's changing the world." But I think there was a huge gulf between you, between your world and hers. A gulf he had built himself, Alexander thought. Every promotion, every acquisition, every bank account, steps that led him away from his origins, from the people who mattered. In the hospital, Greta continued, when she was very weak, she mentioned you. She said you were like siblings once, that you'd followed your path just as it should. The elderly woman adjusted her glasses. There was no resentment, just a sad acceptance that life separates people. Alexander lowered his head, unable to bear the weight of those words. Sarah had kept believing in him, even when he'd forgotten her. What will happen to the girls now? He asked after a long silence. Social Services is looking for a home for them. They wanted to take them to a temporary shelter, but I begged to keep them here until a family is found. Greta hesitated. But I don't know how long I can care for them. My health is fragile, and my pension barely covers my own expenses. Back in the living room, Alexander found Emily and Sophie asleep on the small couch, exhausted from the day's excitement. They lay huddled together as always, clutching Sarah's notebook between them. They looked like angels. He knelt beside them, studying their peaceful faces in the dim light of that modest room. He made a silent promise to Sarah, wherever she might be. I won't abandon them like I abandoned you. I'll love them and protect them just like you would. I'll do better for them and for you. The guilt for abandoning Sarah was a burden he would never fully shake. But maybe, just maybe, by caring for her daughters, he could begin to redeem himself. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander established a routine he never imagined for himself. His office, once an inviolable sanctuary, now had children's drawings on the walls and 2 small coats hanging by the door. His schedule, once packed with meetings and business dinners, now had sacred blocks of time labeled Park with the Girls and Movie Night. The transition had not been easy. Alexander had obtained temporary custody of the twins after a series of hearings and evaluations. Social services, initially skeptical about a rich single man with no child-rearing experience, were convinced by his genuine commitment and by the girls' precarious living conditions. Even so, he was under regular assessment and knew that any misstep could cost him custody. "Sophie, have you brushed your teeth yet?" Alexander asked while trying to fix Emily's hair for school. "I did," the girl replied, appearing at the bathroom door with the toothbrush still in her hand and toothpaste on her chin. Alexander smiled, grabbing a tissue to wipe her face. "Try again, and this time use water, okay?" These small moments, teaching, guiding, caring, were entirely new to him. In the beginning, he felt utterly lost. He didn't know what kids aged 5 should eat, what time they should sleep, or how to comfort them when they had nightmares. He hired a professional nanny to help during the day while he worked, but he insisted on being there mornings and evenings. He wanted to be more than a provider. He wanted to be a constant presence the way Sarah would have been. "Can I take Mr. Buttons to school today?" Emily asked, holding a battered teddy bear she had brought from the old apartment. "Won't he be lonely in your backpack?" Alexander asked, finishing the braid in her hair with newly acquired skill. Emily considered it seriously. "Maybe it's better if he stays here and looks after your office." Alexander smiled. It was amazing how the girls could be mature one moment and completely childlike the next. "Ready for the day, Mr. Buttons?" he asked the bear, placing it in a guard position on his desk. Emily giggled, delighted by the game. For Alexander, it was still surprising how the sound of that laughter could fill empty spaces in his heart he hadn't known existed. Over the weekend, Alexander took the girls to the park with their new bicycles. He had bought one for each with training wheels, helmets, and all the necessary safety gear. The twins were overjoyed. They had never had bikes before. "You have to balance," he explained, holding the seat of Sophie's bike as she pedaled uncertainly. "That's it. Very good. Don't." "Let go," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear and excitement. "I won't let go until you're ready," he promised. Emily, always the bolder one, was already pedaling a few yards ahead, the training wheels stabilizing her wobbly path. "Look, Alex, I'm riding," she shouted, her face glowing with pride. He smiled at the sound of his name. The girls had begun calling him Alex instead of Mr. Reed, a sign that the barriers were slowly coming down. For an hour he ran back and forth, alternating between the two girls, teaching them to brake, to turn, to keep balance. His expensive suit pants ended up stained with grass at the knees, and he had long since tucked his tie into his pocket. But he didn't care. The joy of watching them learn and achieve small victories was worth more than any business meeting. When Sophie finally managed to pedal on her own for a few yards without falling, the smile on her face was like a ray of sunshine. "I did it. Did. You see, I did it." "I sure did," Alexander applauded, feeling a pride that surprised him with its intensity. "You're amazing, Sophie." On the way back home with the girls, exhausted but happy, Alexander reflected on how much his life had changed. 3 months ago, he would have been working on a Sunday, checking reports or negotiating contracts by phone. Now he had grass under his nails and a light heart. Evenings had become his favorite time of day. After dinner, which he now insisted on having with the girls instead of alone in his office, he had established a bedtime story ritual. "Which book are we reading tonight?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed where the twins were already settled. They insisted on sleeping together, even though they had separate rooms. "Make up a story," Emily requested, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "About what?" "A dragon," Sophie suggested. "Who becomes friends with a princess," Emily added. Alexander smiled and began to invent a tale about a lonely dragon living on a mountain, and a brave princess who, instead of fearing him, offered her friendship. As he told the story, he realized it was about acceptance, belonging, and family, themes that now dominated his own thoughts. By the time he finished, Sophie was already fast asleep, but Emily was still fighting drowsiness. "Alex," she murmured, "are you going to stay with us? Forever?" The question caught him off guard, and he felt a knot in his throat. "I'll do everything I can to stay with you." "Yes, promise," she insisted, her eyes closing. "I promise." And this time, unlike the promise he'd made to Sarah all those years ago, he was determined to keep it. Emily smiled and finally surrendered to sleep. Alexander stayed there a few more minutes, watching the two girls, so small and vulnerable, yet so strong. Just like Sarah. "I'm trying to do the right thing, Sarah," he whispered into the silent room. "I hope you're proud." Tuesday morning began, like any other. Alexander prepared breakfast while the girls got dressed for school. He had learned how to make pancakes, not perfect, but the twins seemed to appreciate his culinary efforts. The phone rang and he answered absent-mindedly, thinking it might be his assistant calling about the upcoming board meeting. Alexander Reed. "So it's true," replied a rough, slightly slurred male voice. "The big businessman is playing daddy now." "Who's calling?" Alexander asked, his grip on the phone tightening. "Consider me a concerned father," the voice replied sarcastically. "I heard you've got my daughters." Alexander felt his blood run cold. The girl's father, the man Sarah had thrown out of her life years ago, the man who had abandoned them before they were even born. "How did you get this number?" Alexander asked, keeping his voice low so the girls wouldn't hear from the dining I have my ways, the man said. Look, let's cut the small talk. I know you're rich. I also know you have no legal rights to my daughters. I, on the other hand, am the biological father. A father who never cared about them, Alexander retorted, anger growing in his chest. Details. Details. The man sneered, a cold, nasty sound. The fact is, I can get them back whenever I want, unless, of course, we reach an agreement. What kind of agreement? Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer. A financial one. You keep the girls. I get some suitable compensation for my paternal suffering. Alexander took a deep breath, controlling the urge to shout at the man. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering a practical solution, the man corrected. $50,000, and you'll never hear from me again. The girls stay with you, I go on my way. Everyone wins. I'm not paying you to abandon your daughters, Alexander replied firmly. That would be rewarding your irresponsibility. There was a moment of silence, then the voice returned, stripped of any false cordiality. Listen here, rich boy. You don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. I can make your life a living hell if I want. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. I have rights over these girls. If we can't reach a deal, I'll take them. And believe me, I know how to work the system in my favor. A sob story about a poor father fighting a billionaire who stole his daughters? The press will eat it up. Alexander gripped the phone so tightly his fingers turned white. What's your name? Tom Reeves. Look me up if you want. I'm sure your investigators will find something dirty. Everybody has skeletons. But on paper, I'm just a father wanting his daughters back. Think about it. The call ended, leaving Alexander standing in the kitchen, stunned by the threat. Through the door, he could see Emily and Sophie chatting happily, utterly unaware of the danger that had just emerged. Does he have any legal rights? Alexander asked a few hours later, sitting in his office. The girls were at school, and he had called an emergency meeting with his lawyer. Michael Chen, his attorney for over a decade, adjusted his glasses and sighed. Technically, yes. As the biological father, he has presumed parental rights unless they've been legally terminated. He abandoned them, Alexander argued. Sarah raised them alone. Abandonment can be grounds for terminating parental rights, but it has to be proven in court, Michael explained. And even then, judges tend to favor family reunification whenever possible. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He doesn't even care about them. He just wants money. Which makes this even more complicated, Michael agreed. If we pay, it could be seen as buying children, which is illegal. If we don't pay, he could sue for custody. And while his chances might be slim, the process would be devastating for the girls. What's our best option? Michael took a moment to consider. Go on the offensive. Petition for permanent custody before he does. Gather evidence of his neglect and abandonment. Show how the girls are thriving under your care. And most importantly, prove you're acting in their best interests, not just flexing your financial power. Alexander nodded, determined. Do whatever's necessary. Hire the best investigators. I want to know everything about this Tom Reeves. I should warn you that it could get ugly, Michael cautioned. He might make accusations, dig into your past, question your motives. The press will likely get involved. I don't care about the press, Alexander said. I only care about those two girls. I promised them we'd stay together, and I intend to keep that promise. After the lawyer left, Alexander remained in his office, looking at Mr. Buttons still positioned like a guardian on his desk. The idea of losing the girls was unbearable. In just a few weeks, they had become his entire world. He wouldn't let an opportunist take them away. Not for money, not for revenge, not for anything. When the phone rang again, Alexander answered cautiously, fearing another call from Reeves. Mr. Reed? This is the school calling. Emily has a fever and is asking for you. All worries about lawsuits and custody evaporated instantly, replaced by the immediate concern for Emily's well-being. I'm on my way, he said, already grabbing his car keys. As he left, he glanced one last time at the teddy bear. Hold down the fort, Mr. Buttons. We'll be back soon. No matter what battles he had to fight, legal, personal, or emotional. Alexander was prepared for them all, for Emily and Sophie, for Sarah, and, he realized, for himself as well. The family court was an imposing red brick building with white columns contrasting against the gray autumn sky that morning. Alexander arrived an hour early, accompanied by Michael Chen, and a team of assistants carrying meticulously organized folders detailing every aspect of his life with the twins over the past months. As he walked through the polished marble corridors, under the high ceiling with classical details, Alexander felt like he was walking to his own execution. His heart pounded, and his perfectly knotted tie felt suffocating. He wore a conservative navy blue suit, nothing flashy that could reinforce the arrogant billionaire image Reeves's lawyer would likely try to present. "Take a deep breath," Michael advised, noticing his tension. "Judge Winters is known for being fair, though strict. She'll ask a lot of questions, some possibly uncomfortable. Answer honestly, look her in the eye, and avoid rambling. The more direct, the better." Alexander nodded, trying to calm himself. "Have the girls arrived yet?" "They're with the social worker in a separate room," Michael confirmed. "Dr. Martinez is with them. She's one of the best in the department. She'll prepare them properly for the talk with the judge." A door opened at the end of the corridor, and Alexander saw Emily and Sophie being led by a kind-faced, middle-aged woman. The girls wore the dresses they had picked out the previous weekend, Sophie in blue with white embroidery, Emily in pink with a small ribbon on the chest. Their hair was neatly combed, and they carried little backpacks with comfort toys inside, just as they had planned. When they saw him, their faces lit up momentarily, but they quickly remembered to maintain composure. Alexander had talked with them in recent days, explaining what would happen in court. "It'll be like talking to the school principal," he had said. "You just need to say how you feel and what it's like to live with me." "What if they ask about Mom?" Sophie had asked, her big eyes filled with worry. "Then speak about her with all the love you have in your heart," he had answered, swallowing a lump in his throat. Now, seeing them so small in this intimidating environment, Alexander felt more fear than he ever had in any multi-million-dollar negotiation. Dr. Martinez approached, keeping the girls at a respectful distance. "Mr. Reed, good morning. The girls are fine but a little nervous as expected. They'll have a chance to speak with you before the hearing." Alexander knelt to their level. "Hello, princesses. Are you ready?" Emily, always the stronger one, nodded seriously. "We're being brave like you said." Sophie, however, looked close to tears. "I don't like it here. It's big and scary." "I know," he agreed, straightening the bow in her hair. "But it'll be over soon, and then we can go get ice cream." "How about that?" Sophie's eyes brightened slightly. "With chocolate sprinkles?" "Any way you want," he promised. At that moment, movement near the main entrance caught his attention. Tom Reeves entered, accompanied by his lawyer, Aaron Diaz, a hard-faced man in a cheap suit known for aggressive tactics in custody cases. Reeves wore a suit that clearly didn't fit him, probably borrowed for the occasion. Even from a distance, Alexander noted his bloodshot eyes and the slight tremor in his hands, signs of either a hangover or withdrawal. The girls followed his gaze curiously. "Who's that man?" Emily asked, ever observant. Alexander hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That's Tom Reeves. He's your biological father." Sophie held his hand more tightly. "He doesn't look like us." "Not all families look alike, sweetheart," he replied softly. A court officer appeared, announcing the hearing would begin in 15 minutes. Dr. Martinez gently guided the girls away, taking them back to the waiting room. Alexander watched them go, each step they took tugging at his heart. "Remember," Michael said, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder, "we're well prepared. We have strong witnesses, positive social worker reports, and proof of Reeves's neglect. Stay calm and confident." Alexander tried to cling to those words as he entered the courtroom. Courtroom number 4 was smaller and more intimate than the ones often portrayed on TV. It had dark polished wood, yellowish lighting, and the country's flag beside the judge's bench. Only those directly involved in the case and a few witnesses waiting in the first row were present. Judge Elelena Winters, a woman with a stern but not hostile appearance, graying hair impeccably styled and piercing eyes, entered after the officer's announcement. Everyone rose and waited for her to sit before taking their seats. "Good morning, everyone," she began, placing reading glasses on and examining the documents before her. "We're here to decide custody of Emily and Sophie Morgan, currently under temporary guardianship by Mr. Alexander Reed, but whose custody is contested by their biological father, Mr. Thomas Reeves." She looked over her glasses, first at Alexander, then at Reeves. "I emphasize that in my courtroom, the only interest is the children's well-being. I'm not swayed by power or money, nor by tearful redemption stories without concrete proof." Alexander felt a slight relief. At least the judge didn't seem inclined to favor wealth or a sob story. "We'll begin with opening statements," Judge Winters said. "Mr. Diaz, as counsel for the petitioner, please go ahead." Aaron Diaz stood exuding rehearsed confidence. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about natural and biological rights versus financial privilege. My client, Thomas Reeves, is the girl's biological father. This fact is uncontested and, by law, grants him presumed parental rights." He paused dramatically. "Mr. Reeves made mistakes in the past, yes. He was young and unprepared when he learned of the pregnancy. He made the mistake of drifting away, but now he's here, ready to assume responsibility, ready to meet his daughters, ready to be the father they deserve." Diaz paced a few steps, gesturing emphatically. "On the other side, we have Mr. Reed, a man of immense wealth and power. Yes, but a complete stranger to the girls until a few months ago. No biological ties, no legal bond, only an old friendship with their late mother." He lowered his voice dramatically. "We do not question his intentions or generosity, but we do ask, what is his real motive? Guilt? Atonement? A philanthropic whim that might end as soon as the novelty wears off?" Alexander felt his blood boil but maintained a neutral expression, as Michael had instructed. "Mr. Reed has vast resources to provide material luxuries, no doubt," Diaz went on. "But can expensive toys and elite schools replace the natural love of a father? The law, in its wisdom, believes they cannot. Unless it's proven my client is wholly unfit, natural right prevails over financial convenience." With a nod to the judge, Diaz sat down, looking satisfied. Michael Chen rose calmly, adjusting his glasses. His demeanor contrasted sharply with Diaz's theatrical performance. Calm, measured, professional. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about biology versus finances, as the opposing counsel would have us believe. It's about the best interests of two 5-year-old girls who have already suffered the traumatic loss of their mother." He opened a folder, removing some photographs. "Here are Emily and Sophie 3 months ago when Mr. Reed found them, and here they are now." The photos were handed to the judge, showing a striking contrast. Before, 2 thin girls in worn-out clothes with anxious expressions. After, the same children smiling, healthy, with appropriate clothing and signs of security. "Mr. Reed hasn't just provided material stability," Michael continued. "He has devoted himself fully to creating a safe, loving, and stimulating environment. He completely reorganized his professional life, his time, his priorities. He's established healthy routines, ensured medical and psychological care, enrolled them back in school, learned to braid their hair, tell them bedtime stories, and soothe their nightmares." Michael pulled out more documents. "We have here reports from their school, statements from their child therapist, and evaluations from the social worker assigned by the court, all attesting to the strong bond and the positive development of the girls under Mr. Reed's care." Turning briefly to glance at Reeves before focusing again on the judge, Michael continued, "As for Mr. Reeves, we ask this court to consider some facts. He abandoned Sarah Morgan when he learned of the pregnancy. He didn't contribute a single cent to the girl's upbringing. He showed up only once in 5 years, drunk and demanding money from the mother. And most tellingly, He only expressed interest in the girls after learning they were with a wealthy man. Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Diaz scribbled notes furiously. Your Honor, Michael concluded, we acknowledge that biological ties are important, but more important is the emotional and psychological well-being of two children who have finally found stability after a devastating loss. To uproot Emily and Sophie from the home they've built with Mr. Reed and place them with a father who has never shown genuine interest would be a second tragedy for them. The hearing continued with testimonies. First, the court-assigned social worker presented her assessment, describing Alexander's home as exceptionally suitable and his interaction with the girls as naturally affectionate and attentive. The twins' teacher testified about their academic progress since they began living with Alexander. They arrived timid and insecure. Now they participate, smile, make friends. Emily is reading above her grade level, and Sophie has completely overcome her difficulty with numbers. Greta, the elderly neighbor who had looked after the girls after Sarah's death, was brought in a wheelchair. Despite her physical frailty, her voice was strong as she described Reeves's neglect and Alexander's dedication. Sarah raised those girls alone, working until she got sick, she testified, looking directly at Reeves. Where were you when she needed money for the girls' medicine? Where were you when Emily had pneumonia at 3 and Sarah spent sleepless nights by her bedside? She then looked at the judge. Alexander Reed came into those children's lives like a blessing. For the first time, they have what they deserve. Not just material comfort, but someone who genuinely cares. Reeves then presented his story of redemption, how he had battled alcoholism, how he had always thought of his daughters, how he now had a stable job as a mechanic and a modest apartment suitable for children. I've made mistakes, Your Honor, he said. Tears that Alexander suspected were rehearsed rolling down his cheeks. But I've been clean for 6 months now. I want to meet my daughters, show them they have a father who loves them. His only support came from the owner of the mechanic shop, who confirmed his punctuality for the past few months, and mentioned that Tom always talks about his daughters. After a short recess, it was Alexander's turn to testify. He took a seat where directed, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Mr. Reed, the judge began, you're an extremely busy man with global business responsibilities. How do you reconcile that with raising 2 small children? I've completely reorganized my priorities, Your Honor, he replied, keeping his eyes on hers. I delegated much of my work, turned down international travel, and set strict schedules to be present in the girls' lives. I arranged my day to have breakfast with them, take them to school whenever possible, and I'm invariably home for dinner and bedtime. And when you inevitably need to travel, I have a highly qualified nanny, Mrs. Bennett, whom the girls adore. But I'm limiting trips to what's absolutely essential, and only short distances where I can return the same day. The judge consulted her notes. You have no previous experience with children, correct? No children of your own? No nieces or nephews? No, Your Honor, but I learned quickly. He offered a slight smile. I've discovered that executives can learn a lot from 5-year-olds about what truly matters in life. The judge studied him for a moment. Mr. Reed, please be completely honest. What is your real motivation for wanting custody of these girls? Guilt over not helping their mother? A promise made long ago? A late desire for a family? Alexander sensed. This was the critical question. He took a deep breath. I started out motivated by a debt to Sarah, yes. She helped me when I needed it most, and I wasn't there when she needed me. I feel deep regret I'll carry forever. He paused. But that changed the moment I met Emily and Sophie. They're not an obligation or a way to make amends. They're extraordinary little people who've transformed my life in ways I never imagined. The simple truth, Your Honor, is that I love them, and I can't picture my life without them anymore. The moment Alexander feared most arrived, the judge requested to speak with the girls in private. Emily and Sophie were brought in, looking too serious for children so young. Alexander gave them an encouraging smile as they followed the judge into her chambers. The next 20 minutes were the longest of his life. Sitting on the hard bench, unable to focus on Michael's words, Alexander could only think about what was happening behind that closed door. Would the girls understand the questions? Would they be scared? Would they speak openly about how they felt? When the door finally opened, Emily and Sophie came out hand in hand. Sophie ran straight to Alexander, hugging his legs. She asked a lot of questions, she whispered. About you, about Mom, about the man who's our father. You were very brave, he replied, stroking her hair. Emily stood nearby, her eyes lingering curiously on Reeves, who watched from across the room. He looks sad, she commented softly to Alexander. Sometimes people carry a lot of sadness inside, he replied, unsure how to explain the complexity. Like you before we met? Emily asked, surprising him with her perceptiveness. Yes, he admitted, like me before you. Judge Winters put her glasses back on, examining her notes for a long moment before delivering her decision. The silence in the room was so dense Alexander could hear his own heartbeat. This case raises complex issues, she began. On one hand, we have the biological father's legal rights. On the other, the children's well-being and the emotional bonds already formed. She leafed through some documents. I spoke with Emily and Sophie. They're bright, articulate children for their age, and they're clearly well cared for. They expressed deep affection for Mr. Reed and a positive adjustment to their new home. Alexander felt a flicker of hope. However, the judge continued, and with that single word his heart sank. I cannot ignore Mr. Reeves's paternal rights without a deeper evaluation of his fitness. His recent history suggests an effort at recovery that deserves consideration. She folded her hands, seeming to weigh each sentence. I must also consider that despite Mr. Reed's best intentions and excellent care, he has no legal or biological connection to the children. His link to their late mother, while significant, does not automatically grant custody rights. Reeves allowed himself a small victorious smile as Alexander felt his world crumbling. With all factors in mind, my preliminary decision is this, the judge announced. While we conduct further investigation, including a deeper look into Mr. Reeves's suitability and full psychological evaluations, the girls will be placed temporarily in a neutral foster home. No. Alexander couldn't contain his outburst, rising to his feet involuntarily. The judge shot him a stern look. I understand your reaction, Mr. Reed, but this is a temporary measure to ensure both parties have equal opportunity to demonstrate their fitness for custody without the advantage of current possession. Both parties will have supervised visitation rights during this time. Your Honor, Michael intervened quickly. My client has established a stable routine with the girls. Removing them abruptly will cause needless trauma. I agree the transition must be handled carefully, the judge replied, which is why Mr. Reed will have until tomorrow to prepare the girls and their belongings. A social worker will supervise. With a bang of her gavel, the hearing ended, leaving Alexander reeling as if he'd been punched in the gut. What followed was a blur of movement and sound. The social worker explaining to the girls what would happen. Sophie clinging to Alexander, tears rolling down her small face. Emily silent and pale, asking if they had done something wrong. Alexander's failed attempts to reassure them that it was only temporary, that he would fight for them, that everything would be okay. The next day at his mansion, he helped the twins pack their things. He placed Emily's favorite teddy bear in her backpack, along with their most beloved books. He carefully wrapped Sophie's special blanket, the one with glow-in-the-dark stars. You'll stay with the Fosters. Just for a while, he explained, folding tiny, colorful t-shirts. They're really nice. They have a big backyard and even a dog. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And I'll visit you every day, I promise. When the social worker's car arrived, Alexander felt like he was living a nightmare. At the last moment, Sophie threw her arms around his neck, refusing to let go. Alex, Alex, she cried between sobs. Please come with us. I don't want to go. I'll visit you tomorrow, he promised, fighting back his own tears. Every day. It's just, For a little while. Promise? Emily asked, holding her sister's hand, the only one managing any composure. I promise. He forced another smile. Be brave like your mom was, remember? The girls nodded amidst their tears, and then they were inside the car, looking at him through the window. Tiny hands pressed against the glass, faces filled with confusion and loss. Alexander watched the car drive away, taking with it everything that had given his life meaning in recent months. When it finally disappeared around the corner, he allowed himself to collapse on the mansion's front step, his body shaking with sobs he could no longer hold back. Michael, who had been watching from a distance, approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll appeal immediately, he said. I have connections. I can speed up the process. We'll dig deeper into Reeves's background. There's something off about his sudden redemption story. Alexander raised his head, his eyes red but ignited by a new fire. Do whatever it takes. I won't lose those girls. You didn't fail them, Michael said, as if reading his thoughts. This is only a temporary setback. We'll fight and we'll win. Alexander stood, wiping his face and squaring his shoulders. I'll visit them tomorrow, he announced, his voice regaining firmness. And in the meantime, I want to know everything. About Tom Reeves. Every detail. Every lie. Because this time Alexander Reed would not break his promise, even if he had to move heaven and earth to keep it. The 2 weeks Emily and Sophie spent in the foster's care were the longest of Alexander's life. Despite daily visits allowed by the court, the pain of seeing them in a strange environment and having to say goodbye every day tore him apart. The girls adapted better than he did. Children have remarkable resilience. But he still saw the sadness in their eyes when it was time for him to leave. Meanwhile, Michael Chen worked tirelessly, looking for anything that could help their case. The investigation into Tom Reeves progressed slowly, with some troubling discoveries but nothing conclusive enough for a definitive court victory. The afternoon before the final hearing, Alexander received an unexpected call from Michael. We found something, the lawyer said, his usually calm voice filled with urgency. Or rather, someone found us. I need you at the office immediately. Alexander reached the towering office building in record time. In the conference room, Michael waited with a middle-aged man who looked tired, wearing a janitor's uniform. Alexander, this is Frank Dominguez, Michael introduced. He works at the building where Reeves lives. The man held out a calloused hand for a quick shake. He had dark circles under his eyes and a worried expression. Mr. Dominguez came to us after seeing the newspaper story about the case, Michael explained. I saw the picture of the girls, Frank said, speaking with a slight Hispanic accent. I recognize them. They're the same kids Reeves brings to the apartment during his supervised visits. Alexander's heart raced. You saw something. Frank ran a hand through his graying hair, clearly uncomfortable. I've worked that building for 15 years. I know all the residents. Reeves moved in 8 months ago. He's always caused problems. Noise and parties, neighbors complaining. He paused as if deciding whether to continue. In the last few weeks since he started having the girls over, he changed. The place is cleaner, he's more polite, greets people. I thought maybe he was really turning his life around, but, Michael prompted, sensing the hesitation. Day before yesterday, after the social worker left with the girls, Reeves had some friends over. They were coming from drinking at a bar down the street. They were loud, laughing. Frank looked directly at Alexander. I heard him bragging about how he was about to pull off the custody scam. He said once he had the girls, he could negotiate a better deal with that rich guy. Alexander felt his blood boiling. He admitted he only wants money. That and more, Frank continued. He said he couldn't stand those brats for long, but that they'd serve as leverage to get a fat allowance from you. His friends laughed and toasted his brilliant plan. Would you be willing to testify to this in court tomorrow? Michael asked, his expression grave. Frank hesitated again. I have 2 jobs, 3 kids to support. I can't afford to get into trouble. I understand, Alexander said, sitting down in front of him. But these girls have already lost their mother. They don't deserve to be used as pawns. Frank lowered his eyes. My wife passed away when my kids were little. I know what it's like to struggle raising children alone. He sighed deeply. I'll be in court tomorrow. Alexander felt a wave of gratitude. Thank you, I don't know how to repay you. Take good care of them, Frank replied simply. That's the best thanks. After the janitor left, Michael quickly organized some documents. This is exactly what we needed, an independent witness to Reeves's true intentions. Will it be enough? Alexander asked, allowing himself a spark of hope. Combined with the positive reports about your custody and the circumstantial evidence we already have on Reeves, I believe so. For the first time in days, Michael smiled. Let's get everything ready for tomorrow. The tide is turning, Alexander. The day of the final hearing dawned with an exceptionally blue sky, as if the universe itself wanted to signal a change. Alexander arrived at the courthouse early, heart torn between hope and fear. In the hallway, he met the Fosters, the couple temporarily caring for the girls. How are they? He asked anxiously. Mrs. Foster smiled kindly. They're eager to see you. They've been asking all morning when you would get here. They're wonderful kids, Mr. Foster added. Whoever ends up with custody is very lucky. Alexander thanked them for taking good care of the twins, despite the painful situation. It was comforting to know they were in good hands during the transition. Michael approached, followed by Frank, who looked nervous in his borrowed suit. Everything's prepared. He'll testify early in the hearing. The courtroom looked smaller and more stifling than before. Alexander noticed Reeves seemed overly confident, whispering and occasionally laughing with his lawyer. The sight unnerved him. Did the man truly believe he would win? All rise for the Honorable Judge Elena Winters, the court officer announced. The judge entered, as serious as always, and the session began. After initial formalities, Michael asked to include a new witness statement. Your Honor, Mr. Frank, Dominguez is the janitor of the building where Mr. Reeves resides. He has crucial recent information directly relevant to this case. The judge allowed it, and Frank was called to the stand. He was hesitant at first, but gained confidence as he relayed what he had witnessed. He spoke of Reeves's usual behavior. In the building, the frequent complaints from neighbors about noise and all-night parties. And finally, the shocking conversation he had overheard. He said plainly that the girls were just a means to extort money from Mr. Reed. He called them brats and toasted his brilliant plan with his buddies, Frank concluded. Reeves's face had gone pale. His lawyer tried to discredit the testimony, suggesting Frank had some personal vendetta or had misunderstood casual banter among friends. Mr. Dominguez, Diaz asked, you don't like my client, correct? You've had problems with him before. I have nothing against him personally, Frank replied honestly. I just don't like seeing children used. I have 3 kids of my own. I know how important a stable home is. The judge then asked Reeves to respond to the accusations. Visibly shaken, he denied everything, but his defensive posture and tangled explanations only reinforced Frank's credibility. Michael seized the moment to present other evidence. Neighbors' reports of loud parties at Reeves's apartment, including one in the last 2 weeks, contradicting his claims of sobriety. Credit card statements showing alcohol purchases, and a recent photo discreetly taken of him leaving a bar. The judge watched intently, leaning forward, eyes narrowing slightly as she examined the evidence. After all testimonies, she announced a 30-minute recess to consider the new information. Alexander sat motionless while the courtroom temporarily emptied. Michael squeezed his shoulder in silent support. We've done all we can, the lawyer said. Now we wait. When Judge Winters returned, silence fell once more. Alexander could hear his own heart pounding. This court values truth above all, she began, her voice clear and firm. And the truth that has emerged here today is deeply disturbing. The evidence strongly suggests Mr. Reeves does not seek custody out of paternal love, but for financial gain. She turned a few pages of her notes before continuing. In light of Mr. Dominguez's testimony combined with the other evidence, this court reverses its previous decision. Temporary custody of Emily and Sophie Morgan is granted to Mr. Alexander Reed, while we conduct further investigation into Mr. Reeves's conduct. Alexander closed his eyes, an overwhelming relief nearly knocking him off balance. Michael gripped his arm, smiling broadly. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mr. Reeves's visitation rights are suspended until this investigation is complete and a new hearing is held. She cast a severe glance at Reeves, who looked stunned. This court will not tolerate children being used as instruments of extortion. If these allegations are confirmed, you could face criminal charges for attempted extortion. With a strike of the gavel, the hearing ended. Reeves left quickly, followed by his furious lawyer. Alexander sat for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. We won, Michael said, smiling. Or at least this battle. Thank you, Alexander managed, shaking Frank's hand, who looked just as relieved. I couldn't have done this without you. Go get your girls, the janitor replied with a tired smile. They're waiting for you. The waiting room where Emily and Sophie sat with the Fosters lit up the moment Alexander entered. For a brief second, he stood at the door, taking in the sight of two small figures sitting on a couch, their legs dangling above the floor, drawings spread out on the table before them. Alex! Sophie was the first to notice him, her face transforming into pure joy. She jumped off the couch, running toward him. Emily looked up from her drawing, and a slower but equally radiant smile appeared on her face. In an instant, both of them were dashing toward him, throwing themselves into his outstretched arms. Alexander held them tight, lifting them off the ground, feeling their little arms around his neck, their faces pressed against his chest. In that moment, the world felt perfect again. You're coming home with me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Forever? Sophie asked, her big eyes locked on him. As far as I'm concerned, yes, he replied, kissing the top of her head. Forever. The Fosters helped gather the girls' few belongings, and soon they were in the car on the way home. Alexander watched them in the rearview mirror, chatting excitedly about everything they wanted to do first. Visit their bedrooms, check out their toys, see if the plants they'd sown in the garden had grown. A strange feeling began to well up in his chest. Not just relief, but a profound sense of responsibility. He was now officially their guardian, not just temporarily, but with a real possibility of permanency. The magnitude of that washed over him like a wave. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he made irrevocable mistakes? What if he let them down as he had let Sarah down? The anxiety stayed with him for the rest of the day, even as he reintroduced the girls to their home routine, made their favorite dinner, and helped them rearrange their rooms. That night, after bath time and already in pajamas, the girls asked to sleep in his bed. Just tonight, Emily pleaded, her eyes begging. So we know it's not a dream. How could he say no? The three of them settled into the large bed, Alexander in the middle, one twin on each side. He had read the usual bedtime story, turned off the main light, leaving only the soft glow of the bedside lamp. In the comfortable silence that followed, Alexander felt compelled to share his fears. Somehow, it seemed important to be honest with them. Girls, he began, his voice low in the dimly lit room. I need to tell you something important. Both turned to face him, eyes attentive. I'm very happy you're back. Happier than I've ever been. He said, pausing. But I'm also a little scared. Why? Sophie asked, genuinely confused. That bad man can't take us anymore, can he? No, it's not that, Alexander reassured her. I'm scared of not being good enough for you, of not knowing how to be a good caregiver. He avoided using the word father, unsure if he had that. Right? I've never taken care of kids before you, and you deserve the best. Emily propped herself up on an elbow, studying him with a seriousness beyond her 5 years. You let us pick desserts sometimes and take us to the park, Sophie added. And you know how to braid our hair and give us hugs when we have nightmares. And you taught us to ride bikes. The girls continued taking turns listing all the little things he did for them, each so simple and yet so profound. Alexander felt tears welling up in his eyes. But what if I make mistakes, he asked when they finally stopped. Sophie shrugged as if the answer were obvious. Mom used to say everyone makes mistakes. You just say you're sorry and try again. Yeah, Emily agreed. Besides, she and her sister exchanged a look as if confirming something important. You're already our dad, they finished in unison. Their words hit Alexander like a ray of sunshine after days of rain. He drew them both closer, hugging them tight, unable to speak for a moment. I love you, he finally managed. So much. We love you too, Emily replied, yawning. To the moon and back, Sophie mumbled, already half asleep. Alexander stayed, awake long after the girls had drifted off, watching their peaceful faces. The fear was still there. It would probably never go away completely. But there was something stronger now. Determination. Determination to be worthy of their trust, to learn and grow with them, to be not just a guardian but the father they already believed him to be. You'd be proud, Sarah, he whispered into the darkness. I promise I'll take care of them, always. Autumn had arrived in full force. Yellow and red leaves danced on the breeze before settling softly on the ground, creating a multicolored carpet. Over the cemetery grass, the sky was a perfect shade of blue without a single cloud in sight, as if nature itself wanted to offer its best backdrop for the moment. Alexander adjusted Emily's scarf, making sure she was well protected against the cool morning air. Beside her, Sophie clutched a bouquet of sunflowers, Sarah's favorite flowers according to the twins. In her other hand, she carried a folder filled with drawings they had carefully made over the past week. Is it still far? Emily asked as they walked the stone paths between headstones and monuments. Almost there, Alexander replied, checking the small map provided by the cemetery office. It was the first time he was bringing the girls to their mother's grave. In the 3 months since he'd obtained permanent custody, he'd waited for the right moment, when all legal battles were fully resolved and the twins felt secure enough to face this emotional visit. Tom Reeves had vanished after losing the custody case, abandoning the apartment and leaving debts behind. Alexander's lawyers had secured a restraining order in case he ever showed up again, but the man seemed to have disappeared completely, likely looking for another scam in some distant place. It's here, Alexander said, stopping before a simple but elegant headstone. Sarah Morgan, 1990, 20 when 24, beloved mother, daughter, and friend. Her love lives on in every smile of her daughters. Alexander had arranged to replace the original municipal plaque with something more fitting. The new inscription had been carefully chosen with the girls' input. Sophie stepped forward first, kneeling to place the sunflowers in the small planter at the base of the headstone. Hi, Mom, she said softly. We brought your favorite flowers. Emily stood back a bit, watching with serious eyes. Alexander could sense her hesitation and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. It's okay, he whispered. To her, we can just stand here if you want. Emily shook her head, summoning courage, and stepped forward to stand beside her sister. It's been a while since we've seen you, Mom, she finally said. But we think about you every day. Alexander felt a lump in his throat. He had rehearsed in his mind what he wanted to say, the words he wanted to share with Sarah, but now that he was here before her headstone with her daughters by his side, everything felt inadequate. Girls, he began after a moment, I wrote a letter for your mom. Would you like to hear it? The twins nodded, sitting on the small stone bench installed next to the grave. Alexander pulled an envelope from his coat pocket, opened it carefully, and unfolded a handwritten sheet of paper. Dear Sarah, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion. It's been many years since we last spoke. Too many. When we were young, you saved me in more ways than I could ever count. You gave me food when I was hungry, shelter when I had nowhere, to go and hope when everything seemed hopeless. Alexander paused briefly, glancing at the girls who listened intently. I promised I would never let you down, but I broke that promise. I built a life of success and forgot the person who made it possible. There is no excuse for that abandonment, only deep regret I will carry forever. Sophie reached out and took Emily's hand, an instinctive gesture of connection as they heard words they didn't fully understand, but felt were important. Fate, or maybe your invisible hand, guided your daughters to me. Emily and Sophie have taught me what truly matters in life. Through them, I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten, the ability to laugh without restraint, to marvel at small discoveries, to love unconditionally. Alexander took a deep breath before continuing. Now I have a new promise to make. I won't fail again. I promise I will care for your daughters as if they were my own. In fact, in my heart, they already are. I promise to raise them with the values you cherished: kindness, courage, integrity, and generosity. I'll tell them stories about you every day, so they never forget the extraordinary woman who was their mother. He lifted his gaze to the blue sky for a moment, gathering the strength for his final words. Wherever you are, I hope you can see what we're building: a family, a home, a life filled with love. It's the least you deserved, and it's what your daughters will always have. With eternal love and gratitude, Alexander. When he finished, silence hung over them like a gentle blanket. Emily was the first to break it. Mom would like that letter, she said confidently. She always said we have to tell people we love them before it's too late. Alexander smiled through tears he could no longer hold back. She was very wise. Sophie opened her folder of drawings, spreading them out in front of the headstone. We made these for you, Mom, she explained. This one's our new house with Alex, and this one's my room. This one's us at the park riding bikes. Each drawing depicted a moment of their new life together, colorful and full of surprisingly detailed illustrations for children so young. The last drawing, made jointly by the twins, showed 3 figures holding hands in front of a house, with a 4th figure smiling from the sky surrounded by stars. That's you watching us, Emily said, pointing to the figure in the sky. Alex says you're always looking out for us. Alexander knelt between the girls, putting an arm around each. We can come here whenever you want to talk to your mom, and we can talk to her every day wherever we are. Can she really hear us? Sophie asked, looking at the sky with hopeful eyes. I believe she can, Alexander answered. In some way, the people we love always hear us. They stayed a while longer, the girls telling their mom about their new routines, their friends at school, and all the things they were learning. Alexander watched in awe at how naturally they spoke, as if Sarah were truly there listening. When the wind grew colder, he suggested they head home. The girls said goodbye with kisses blown toward the headstone, promising to visit again soon. Christmas morning dawned with a gentle snowfall, transforming the mansion's garden into a fairy tale. A scene. Delicate snowflakes danced in the air before settling on tree branches, creating a white blanket over the entire landscape. Alexander woke to muffled giggles and light footsteps approaching his room. He pretended to remain asleep as the door slowly opened and 2 pairs of small feet crept across the carpet. Do you think he's awake yet? Emily whispered. I don't know. Sophie whispered back. He looks like he's still sleeping. Should we wait? But I want to see his face when he opens our present.